What would make a prince abandon everything? A palace, wealth, a beautiful wife, and a newborn son? Today, we're exploring the real story of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha. This isn't a fairy tale. It's about a privileged young man who faced the same questions we all face. What is the point of life when everything ends? Is there meaning beyond success and pleasure? Let's discover why his choice 2,500 years ago still resonates with millions today. Act 1. The Golden Cage. Siddhartha was born around 563 BCE in what is now Nepal. His father, King Siddhartha, ruled the Sakya clan. Before Siddhartha's birth, a sage made a startling prediction. This child would become either a great king or a great spiritual teacher who would renounce the world. His father wanted a king, not a monk, so he made a decision that would shape Siddhartha's entire childhood. He would shield his son from anything unpleasant. No poverty, no sickness, no death, only beauty, youth, and pleasure. Imagine growing up in 3 palaces, one for each season, surrounded by the most beautiful gardens, the finest food, constant entertainment. Siddhartha was trained in martial arts, philosophy, and the arts. At 16, he married his cousin Yasodhara. He had everything a person could want. But here's the thing about golden cages. You eventually realize you're still trapped. Siddhartha began to feel a deep restlessness. The same pleasures, the same routines. He was 29 years old and had never left the palace grounds. He began asking his father, "What's beyond these walls?" Have you ever felt this? When you have everything you're supposed to want, but something still feels missing? Act 2. The 4 Sights. Finally, his father agreed to let him see the city. But he ordered the streets cleaned, the sick hidden away. Only healthy, happy people would be visible. But you can't control everything. On his first trip outside, Siddhartha saw an elderly person, bent over, wrinkled, struggling to walk. He asked his charioteer Channa, "What happened to this person?" "That is old age, my prince. It happens to everyone." Everyone? This was the first crack in his worldview. On his second journey, he encountered a sick person, suffering from disease. Again, this happens to everyone? Yes, my prince. No one escapes illness. The third journey was the hardest. He saw a funeral procession, a dead body being carried to cremation, family members weeping. And this? Death, my prince. The fate of all living beings. That night, Siddhartha couldn't sleep. Think about this moment. He realized everything he loved, his wife, his newborn son Rahula, his parents, himself. All of it was temporary. All of it would end in old age, sickness, and death. The comfortable life he'd known suddenly felt like a lie. But on his 4th journey, he saw something different. A wandering ascetic, a spiritual seeker who had given up worldly life. Despite having nothing, this person appeared peaceful, even joyful. Siddhartha asked, "Is it possible to find peace in the midst of this suffering?" That question would change everything. Act 3. The Great Departure. At 29 years old, Siddhartha made the hardest decision of his life. In the middle of the night, he went to his wife and baby's room. Yasodhara was sleeping with their newborn son. He wanted to hold his child one last time, but he was afraid if he picked up the baby, he'd wake Yasodhara and he wouldn't have the strength to leave. So he walked away. He cut his hair with his sword, exchanged his royal robes for simple cloth, and sent his horse back to the palace with his charioteer. Let's be honest, this is the part of the story that troubles people. He abandoned his family. He walked away from responsibility. How can we admire this? But here's what's important to understand. Siddhartha wasn't running away from his problems. He was running toward a solution, not just for himself, but for everyone. He believed that if he could understand suffering, he could help end it for all beings, including his own family. Was it selfish? Or was it the ultimate act of compassion? Different people answered differently. What matters is that he felt he had no choice. The question of human suffering had become urgent and unavoidable. For 6 years, he practiced extreme asceticism. He studied with the greatest spiritual teachers. He meditated until his body was skeletal. He pushed himself to the edge of death, thinking that punishing the body would free the mind. But extreme self-denial didn't work any better than extreme luxury had. He was just replacing one cage with another. Act 4. The middle way. At his lowest point, weak and near death, a village girl named Sujata offered him a bowl of rice milk. He accepted it. His fellow ascetics were disgusted. They thought he'd given up. But Siddhartha had a realization. The extreme path doesn't work either. He walked to a large fig tree, later called the Bodhi Tree, the tree of awakening. He sat down and made a vow. I will not move from this spot until I understand the nature of suffering. On the full moon night of May, he sat in meditation. Throughout the night, he examined his mind with total honesty. He saw his fears, his desires, his attachments. He observed how suffering arises from craving, wanting things to be different than they are. He understood how everything is connected, constantly changing. And at dawn, at 35 years old, he understood, not through belief or philosophy, but through direct experience. He saw the nature of reality clearly. He became awakened, Buddha. So what did he discover? Act 5. What he found. The Buddha discovered what he called the Four Noble Truths. Think of them as a doctor's diagnosis. First, suffering exists. Not just pain, but dissatisfaction, restlessness, the feeling that something isn't quite right. He wasn't being pessimistic, just honest. Second, suffering has a cause. It comes from craving, from wanting things to be permanent when everything changes, from clinging to a fixed self when we're constantly changing. Third, suffering can end. This was revolutionary, not through death or escape, but through understanding. Fourth, there's a path to end suffering. A practical method involving ethics, mental training, and wisdom. After his awakening, he could have stayed under that tree in blissful peace. Instead, he spent the next 45 years walking across India, teaching anyone who would listen, kings and beggars, men and women, believers and skeptics. And yes, he eventually returned to his family. His son Rahula became one of his disciples. His wife Yasodhara respected his path. His father, though initially angry, came to understand. So, why does this ancient story matter today? Because Siddhartha's questions are still our questions. How do we find meaning when everything is uncertain? How do we deal with loss, aging, and death? Can we find peace in the midst of chaos? The Buddha's answer wasn't a belief system. It was an invitation. Don't take my word for it. Investigate for yourself. Test it in your own life. He was a prince who walked away from everything to find what truly mattered. And what he found, he freely gave away. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. Let's explore these ancient teachings together.